In this video, I will be attempting to survive 100 days in the Himalayas in hardcore Minecraft. This means I'll have to watch out for the extreme cold temperatures, aggressive mobs, and a certain legendary beast. Oh, and every 20 days a winter storm will arrive, turning this scenic landscape into a snowy nightmare. But with that being said, let's get started. Now before we get into the video, I have a question. Do you want to play modded Minecraft with your friends, or even just have your own SMP? Well, if so, you might want to check out NameHero. That's right, NameHero is the sponsor of today's video. NameHero offers Minecraft hosting with the right priorities, affordability, and support. Take a look at this cool little chart to see how they compare to other server hosts. But more than just affordability, NameHero is also just easy to use. Their panel explains everything you'd need to know. And if you do need help, just contact their support chat. See, these guys have been around for almost 10 years. That is almost older than Tino. But not quite. He's pretty old. He's kind of old. Isn't that right? Anyways, a big problem with servers these days is the lag. And so if you're worried about lag with NameHero, well, I have something designed to test that for you. Look at that. That's interesting. Look at that. That's also very interesting. Now that is truly interesting. No lag whatsoever. That's really impressive. If you want your own NameHero server, be sure to use the link in the description. But with that being said, let's get started with day. I spawned in and took a look around me. After seeing an opening in the trees, I approached this river. And then got to collecting wood. I made some stone tools and then got some fish, before cooking it and crafting a boat. So far, everything was going well, but I knew that probably wouldn't last long. Either way, I made my way up the river. Boat time. I love boat time. Boat time loves me. And eventually into some more mountainous terrain. That's when the river came to an end. And with nowhere else to go, I started climbing this mountain. Only I soon began to freeze. Okay, I'm freezing. I'm freezing. I am definitely cold. Come on, go for the water, go for the water. Go for the water, go for the water. Please, please, please. I'm not climbing the Himalayas until I have some wool. I need wool. With an objective in mind, I continued back up the river. But when the sun began to set, I pulled over to a riverbank and began my burrowing. Almost immediately, I found gold ore, and then a little while later, some iron. Oh, and lava. And then I kept mining, way into the night. And the next morning, I dug my way into the river, before realizing that, well, it wasn't morning. See, I had stayed in my mine for a bit too long. So I quickly hopped in my boat and continued cruising along the river. This time in search of wool or a structure of some kind. However, as I rode my way through the rocky Himalayan river, I couldn't help but notice just how amazing the scenery was. I pulled over to craft my shield and some bottles, but had to take a quick moment to kill these slimes. And then, just like in Madagascar, my luck took a turn for the worse. I love rain. Okay, I'm gonna lose it. That's not funny. So I burrowed again, and after crafting my glass bottles, I headed towards the river and healed up. I wasn't gonna let a storm stop me from finding wool. After all, I needed to craft wool clothes in order to survive the cold. And so I went to try and collect some string from these spiders, as 4 string can craft a piece of wool. But after collecting just 2 pieces, I decided that it was way too risky. Soon enough though, I saw this sheep. And even though it only dropped 1 piece of wool, I considered it a small win. After a while, the storm seemed to downgrade to normal rain. And so I continued my rowing adventure. And soon enough, I spotted a structure. No, it's a villager tower. Duh. Knowing that there might be string or wool within the structure, I knew I had to at least try to get into it. So I went in from the top and blocked off the stairs. I then found some really great loot, like this relic that extends my health, and a good bit of food. But, of course, no wool. After a night of charcoal burning, the sky soon cleared to show that it was the morning of day 3. Before setting off, I equipped my heart relic, and was really surprised at the amount of health that it gave me. However, I used up a good bit of that health in my poorly planned escape that occurred shortly after. But after crafting some bread, I continued on in my search of wool for both a bed and clothes. After a while, I got tired of rowing and went through this forest instead. It was a pretty dense forest, but of course that soon didn't matter as I spotted another river. I followed this river while also watching this bird here. The mountains around me started to get really high though, as I was heading deeper into the Himalayas. As the sun began to set, the river came to a dead end. So I once again decided to head into the forest, looking for a good spot to burrow. Yet, I soon saw a light from afar. Upon approaching it, I took this lantern and headed up the dirt path behind it. As I started to freeze, I placed the lantern down, and my assumption was correct. It warmed me back up. And so, that's how I walked along this path, with the added obstacle of mobs spawning around me. That's why I spotted these prayer flags and had an idea of where I could be. Hoping I was right, I continued along the path, but I was immediately distracted by this huge structure. However, I didn't have any time to think about it, as a ridiculous amount of mobs spawned near me, and I had to run. And on top of that, I began to freeze. I warmed up under this lantern and entered this room to see that the walls were lined with beds. So I quickly hopped in one and went to sleep. Next morning, I confirmed that this was, in fact, the place I thought it was. See, I was clearly in the Bhutan side of the Himalayas, as this was the Tiger's Nest Monastery. The Paro Taksong, or Tiger's Nest, is a sacred Buddhist monastery and serves as one of Bhutan's most well-known sites. It was built in a seemingly improbable place to build a monastery. But not only was the task accomplished, it was accomplished masterfully. You can visit this sacred site yourself, but note that Bhutan isn't the easiest place to travel to, as it only opened its doors to tourism about 50 years ago. I healed up and took a look around the monastery, noticing that it was, well, very high up. After exploring a bit, I saw these doors that were locked. Now, while I could just mine around it, for the sake of this, I will find the key. I searched the monastery for a key, and eventually, after searching the room I was initially in, I found it. So I went back up and tried the door. This hidden room was pretty dark, but the centerpiece is what got my attention. Oh. Okay. This is a glowing book. I should probably... Can I go from this end? Oh, yeah, okay. Do I have to do a narration voice? I'll do a narration voice. I was heading to summit a mountain north of Chitwan National Park. I had just left the train station below the park, and was going towards the backside of the mountain when I heard a distant howl. This howl was unearthly, echoing through these snowy canyons around me. Upon following the noise, I found this patch of fur. Large footsteps were alongside it. I still don't believe in this mythical Yeti beast, but this was a strange experience. Okay. With my first piece of Yeti lore collected, I had a new objective in mind now, and that was to find a spot for my base. So I headed along the mountain, but didn't make it long before I had to sleep. The next morning, I found myself trekking alongside the mountain, while also reading the book again to try and get some clues. However, shortly after, I spotted this Himalayan tar. but more on them later. For now, I needed to start on my base and find some more wool, as having to place this lantern every few steps was getting really annoying. So I headed down to the river and rode for a good part of the day, before finally spotting a sheep. And that night, I tried hunting spiders again, but it was a pretty big failure as my wool hood ended up breaking, so I just went to sleep. On day 6, I found myself not in a great spot. See, my health and hunger were really low, so I ended up killing some more fish. Before heading along the river some more, I decided that a river base would be nice, but I also wanted to head west some, as Bhutan was in the eastern part of the Himalayas, and I wanted my base to be a bit more in the center. After a bit of necessary tree jumping though, I spotted something hopeful nearby. Chimney. I followed the smoke and found a house. Well, no, a bakery, apparently. This bakery was full of helpful foods, but as I opened this nightstand, I found something that was far more helpful. Oh, yes. Okay, very good. Yeah, I was really happy. Until I stepped outside and, well, into these bushes. Next day, my focus shifted to finding a spot for my base. So I continued west, and did a lot of walking. I found a river by sunset, and yeah, the sunset was pretty cool. On day 8, I ate this chocolate pastry that gave me speed, and promptly ran alongside the river until the effect ended. I then got in the river and did some rowing, knowing that I was now heading into Nepal. Now, Nepal is, of course, known for Mount Everest, among other places like Kathmandu and Lumbini. But what many people don't know about Nepal is just how diverse the scenery in this country is. But I'll talk more on that later. For now, I need to get a base started. And as this river reached a natural dead end, I decided that this would be the perfect place to build one. So I cleared the area and started on an outline. See, I wanted a base that incorporated pieces of Nepal, Tibet, and Bhutan, while also being structurally sturdy in case a certain Yeti decides to stop by. So I continued building into day 9, where I got some wood for this floor, and began this bridge. I then did this wood floor and finished the top of the bridge, before the morning of day 10, where I had to do one more outline before heading out to continue exploring. So I started on the walls and dug out the floor, and then I filled it in, before collecting my items and heading in the direction behind my base. See, while I could go to Chitwan and find the Yeti north of it, Chitwan is very far west from here, as I had just left Bhutan. So I wanted to explore somewhere closer first, but don't worry, the Yeti was very much still in the back of my mind. Anyways, I started up this hilly terrain, and it got really windy. Soon enough, I was freezing, so I quickly crafted the wool clothes and equipped them. Okay. And while I couldn't really see much from up here, I did catch an amazing sunset. I woke up the next morning and killed some mobs, before walking through the forest nearby. But I soon found an animal. And not just any animal. Oh my gosh, you are my favorite thing. It's a red panda. You are my favorite thing. You are my favorite thing. Thanks to my abundance of string and slime, I can actually craft a lead this time. So that's just what I did. You gotta come with me now. Yeah, we're going on an adventure. Yeah, this guy was gonna help me find the Yeti. But if the Yeti so much as even looks at it, well, then let's just say the Yeti will remain a myth. On day 12, I continued leading my red panda, until we came across a giant, almost deserty area. And this could only mean one thing. We had found the Tibetan Plateau. The Tibetan Plateau. 1.5 million square miles of mountains, lakes, and flats, making it not only the largest plateau in the world, but also the highest. But what exactly is a plateau? Well, to quote National Geographic, a plateau is a flat, elevated landform that rises sharply above the surrounding area. But the Tibetan Plateau isn't just home to geographic spectacle. It's home to a deep and complex history. And now it sits as an autonomous region within China, meaning that while China does claim it, Tibet has a level of independence within its own government. I walked along the vast landscape with my new companion and ended up mining some sandstone for my base. How did you... Don't go in the hole. No, don't do that. Yeah, come here, come here. And as I continued mining, I ended up naming him. Alright, Flumbo. Yeah, it's too good of a name. It is too good of a name. I mined a bit more sandstone, but after my pickaxe broke, I decided that it was time to just leave the plateau. For now, at least. Next morning, I led Flumbo in the direction of my base. Before doing some research on how to tame him. And guess what? The food needed to tame him? Well, I had an abundance of it. Yes. Yes, Flumbo. Taming him made it much easier to travel, as he just followed along behind me. But as we entered the forest I'd found him in, it started to snow. Finally, we made it back as night fell. I decided to do a bit more base work before fully heading west in search of the Yeti. So I did the walls and the top trim before seeing that I was one terracotta block short. I then started on the roof. And the next day I discovered that I did not have enough dark oak to finish it, and since there were no dark oak trees nearby, I had to use gray terracotta instead. So I gathered some and began lining this garden that I wanted in between my buildings. And the next morning, I finally finished my first roof layer, which meant that I could head west now. And so I did just that. Well, I had to head south down this river first. So I eventually left the river and properly headed west. But that afternoon, as we crossed the mountains, I spotted a bit of a concerning sight. Yeah. No, this is definitely not pleasant. We stayed the night at the abandoned camp before waking up the next morning and taking this globe. However, after leaving the camp and doing a bit of forest travel, the berry bushes ended up destroying my wool clothing, so I doubled back to get some wool from the tents. Only that's when I started to freeze. Yeah, I messed up the crafting recipe multiple times. But eventually, I got myself warmed up again. And that just reminded me that in 3 days, there would be a storm. So I took some more wool and continued west. On day 18, I had to fight this skeleton. And that's when I saw Flumbo step in and actually help fight it. Oh, you're so cool. That's sick. I could see that being a big issue in the future, but I'm not going to go into that. After that 2v1 though, I continued west. That is, until I spotted a deserty looking building. But of course, it was a pillager base. So I quickly sat Flumbo far away before seeing a horde of pillagers spawn before me. Yeah, this wasn't ideal. I took my usual strategy of entering from the top, and after locating the chests, I dug down. Only to have many more pillagers spawn around me. A lot more than I can manage. Yeah, I ran and got Flumbo up immediately. But after running for a bit, I came up with a pretty decent plan. I headed back into the building while they were away, and quickly broke the spawner as new ones arrived. So I led them away as well, and then doubled back. Only to see that this time, there was one wielding a throwing axe, and yeah, this just was not worth it. So I took Flumbo and we quickly left. Although I noticed that we were still being pursued by the Axeman. So next morning I headed up high into the Himalayas, with the Axeman still behind us. He's just still coming. He's still going, okay. Eventually we found ourselves at the top of these mountains, and that's when I heard something. Yeah, Yeti or not, we ran. After making it down the mountain, I pulled my spyglass out to take a look, but I didn't see anything. Now, it's fully possible that it was a bear, but I wasn't about to take any chances. And as I continued into these woods, I remembered that I had not yet escaped danger. The storm had arrived, and it was intense. Not only was snow flying literally everywhere, but it was also really bright. So I picked a direction and headed in it, hoping to get to a river. Only there were so many trees. I made sure Flumbo was close by as we navigated the harsh winter winds. But with berry bush after berry bush, I found myself getting really low. However, on the good side of things, no Yeti. Well, yet, at least. But that night, I finally found the river. As I woke up on day 21, I realized that the storm was already over. See, this time around, the storm can be anywhere from just 1 day to 5 days long. So it looks like I just got lucky this time. But with that being said, I healed up a bit before continuing west through some trees, and eventually breaking my wool chest plate. Yeah, at this point, berry bushes are just as bad as seagulls in this series. Regardless, I continued through the mountains, now placing lanterns as I went. And after taking this river, I decided that if I didn't find something soon, I would have to head back home. Not much happened on day 22, as I went along the river and left it to head further west. In the afternoon, I walked along the mountains some more, before waking up on day 23 and spotting this bear. I approached it, but when it became aggressive, Flumbo and I ran. Now, I want to point out that the Himalayan black bears are responsible for a lot of supposed Yeti footprints, as they are a likely suspect to be mistaken for the Yeti. But black bears aside, Flumbo and I did some tree jumping and eventual mountain climbing before stopping right in our tracks, as a large village had appeared before us. Only I recognized this village pretty quickly. Lukla is a town in northeastern Nepal that serves as one of the final stops a summit team will make before trekking to Everest on the nearby trail. But Lukla is also home to what many agree is the most dangerous airport in the world, thanks to this landing strip and the steep drop-off that's at the end of it. Yet as I explored the Everest outpost, I found some really great loot, like this string, this shield, and snow blocks, which are very helpful. I crafted these wool leggings, and the next morning, I had a decision to make. See, I knew that the Everest Trail was nearby, so should I put the Yeti mission on hold and try to summit the legendary mountain? If so, I would definitely want to return home after. So while I make my decision, I looked around the village some more. I ended up finding this fun little Easter egg in one of the hotels, before searching the airport buildings. That's when I decided to collect some of these white blocks from my base. And when I opened this chest, I found some more decent loot. Soon enough, it started to snow, so I went indoors and ended up finding some hay bales. And that evening, I made my decision. Yes, I was going to attempt Everest. On day 25, I headed out in search of the trail. I found it a short while later, and started to follow along it. After a while of walking, I climbed this hill and found a sign pointing towards the Everest base camp. So I kept walking the trail, having to place a lantern every 5 steps or so. But that evening, I came to a more or less alarming bridge. Yeah, it had some holes in it, but Flumbo seemed to get across it just fine. Next morning, I continued along the trail, and yeah, it was a very long trail. But I soon came across this info board with really helpful information. However, shortly after, the trees began to thin out, and I caught my first glimpse of base camp. Yeah, I had reached the mountain. This mountain needs no introduction. At over 29,000 feet tall, or almost 9,000 meters tall, Everest is truly a beast of a mountain. It was first summited in 1953 by Sherpa Tenzing Norgay and New Zealand mountaineer Edmund Hillary, the latter of which had a fascination with the Yeti, as Hillary went on to search for the Yeti a year after his summit. As for the mountain itself, well, summiting it involves a series of difficult and life-threatening steps, which have been appropriately adapted to Minecraft. But before I go over what it takes to summit Everest, I want to make something clear. This mountain has claimed the lives of over 300 people. Summiting it in this game is in no way comparable to the real thing. And, as always in these videos, respect was emphasized in the making of this. But with that being said, here's what I have to do. My first obstacle will be the Kathmandu Icefall, an almost 2-mile long stretch of ice and deep canyons that can be incredibly unstable. This can also be one of the most dangerous parts of summiting Everest. Next, I will reach Camp 1 and eventually Camp 2, but when I reach Camp 3, that's when I'll start to have problems with maintaining my oxygen levels. However, Camp 4 is where I really have to start worrying, as once I leave it, I will have entered the death zone. At a height of almost 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, the death zone is considered to be the most dangerous part of summiting Everest, as once you enter it, you have a limited amount of time to reach the summit before your body stops functioning properly. And with all that in mind, I begin my climb tomorrow. As for now, I looked through base camp and grabbed some loot like these diamond boots, food, wool clothes, and this backpack, before sleeping in a tent. I started day 27 by sitting Flumbo down, as this was way too risky to take him. I then headed for the icefall, and after a while of walking, I reached it. However, it soon began to snow, and to make matters worse, there was powdered snow everywhere. No. I then saw this bridge that connected the two sides of a deep and fatal crevice. I'm not a fan of this really, but you know, that's fine. After making it across, I kept along the icefall, but the powdered snow proved to be an issue. Yet I kept moving, as I needed to get across the icefall to reach the next camp. And after a bit more climbing, I saw another bridge. After getting across the bridge, I spotted the next camp, so I headed towards it and made it there by nightfall. I woke up on day 28 and climbed further up this slope, before finally getting my first view of the summit. I kept climbing the slope and headed for Camp 2, before finally making it there. Shortly after arriving, I saw this gold block with a button on it, but after pressing it, nothing seemed to really happen. Okay. However, it wasn't long until everything went dark. Okay. Alright. Oh. Okay. Thinking quickly, I knew I had to find the gold block, as that was surely the oxygen canister. After a while of searching in the dark, I had refilled my oxygen. Yeah, this was definitely alarming, but I kept going up to Camp 3. I reached the camp by early afternoon, and noticed that this one also had an oxygen canister, so I kept that in mind. On the morning of day 29, I headed out of Camp 3 and made the push for Camp 4. Only as I eventually reached the camp, my oxygen ran out again. The last canister I saw was back at Camp 3, so I descended the mountain quickly, but with each bit of powdered snow that I fell onto, I was a few short seconds away from dying. At this point, I couldn't even find the camp, as all I saw through the darkness was snow. Until finally, I spotted yellow wool. From here, I was able to get to the oxygen and refill it. That evening, I made it all the way back up to Camp 4, and I was ready to make the final push for the summit the next day. I looked up at the ridge that I had to cross next, and proceeded to climb up it. Before climbing across it, there was an incredibly steep drop that I was one wrong step away from falling down. Yeah, it'd be really funny if I turned on auto jump right now, but of course I chose not to. After crossing the ridge, I knew I was in the final leg. Only I was now in the death zone, which meant that I had to make it quick. However, as I climbed, the summit kept getting further and further away. But I kept going. Until finally, I had summited Everest. Okay. Look at that. Can't even see anything else. After enjoying my brief time at the summit, I now had to descend the mountain, and while normally that's a process that's just as tedious as the summit itself, I decided to opt for the, less safe approach down. Can you blame me though? I just wanted to see Flumbo. And so, with my fast descent, I made it back to Camp 2 by nightfall. The next morning, I left the camp and realized that I still had to cross the Khumbu Icefall. So I decided to do it my own way this time. Eventually, after a bit more walking, I had made it back to base camp, and a certain someone was waiting for me. Flumbo, Flumbo, I did it. I summited Everest. Isn't that cool? Thank you, Flumbo, for your input. After catching up with Flumbo, I figured that there had to be an easier way to get home. So I took Flumbo north with me, as I was going to cut across the Tibetan Plateau. On day 32, I made it to the plateau, and then collected some of this white concrete powder from my base. After a good bit of collecting, we continued towards our home. In fact, this traversing took a few days to complete. It was literally just 30 minutes of non-stop travel, and that might be due to the fact that this map would take about 2.5 hours to fully walk across. Horizontally, that is. Either way, Flumbo behaved well as we walked across the plateau, and on the evening of day 36, I had found the spot that I'd mined at, meaning we were pretty close. So, the next morning we headed back through Flumbo Forest, before finally reaching the base. And you know what? I think it's about time for a certain base montage. I finished the main frame of my Tibet-inspired building, placing a lot of white palleted blocks, and planning to have a colored trim at the top. Then, on day 38, I got some sandstone so I could continue the next floor of my Nepalese and Bhutanese-inspired building. Also ended up crafting an iron pickaxe, and adding a lot of chiseled details to the walls, before doing a good amount of the next floor. Day 39 was garden day, as I did a lot of digging and dirt placing in order to get this garden ready. Also hollowed out this path for the water, and also got a good bit of the overall base garden done. However, once again, I had forgotten something. Something I really need to stop forgetting about. Yeah, the storm. I immediately ran inside, but after a while, I decided to sneak out and get some wood. Soon enough, I crafted these spruce stairs, as the storm had directed my attention to the interior. So I made this staircase and got the next floor started. But that evening, it seemed like the storm had gotten really aggressive. In fact, I was worried that there was going to be damage done to my base. However, that would soon be the least of my concerns. I awoke on day 41 to see that the storm was still here, and after hearing a skeleton outside, Flumbo and I joined up and fought it. And I almost died on the way back in. So I quickly got to healing before I got my first glimpse at what I had been hunting. Okay. Go. I immediately took Flumbo and ran. After reaching a good distance, I then sat him down and put him in this box. I could not risk having him get hurt here. As for myself though, well, I went back to try and fight the beast. There he is. I kept my distance, but as I did, he picked up a giant snowy boulder and threw it at me. What's that? Oh, I had nowhere to run but my halfway destroyed bridge, as the creature was right behind me. After distancing myself again, I went back in to try and land a few hits. That proved to be a bad idea. Okay. This time I headed for the water to try and swim away. But it was gaining on me. And when I turned around, I saw why. Oh, he freezes water. He freezes water. Eventually, I made it to shore and got away before nightfall. Within the Himalayas lies a Bigfoot-adjacent beast that needs no introduction. However, this cryptid isn't a modern legend, as its origins can be traced back to Tibetan folklore, where it's even incorporated into ancient Tibetan mythology. So much and so little are known about this creature, thanks to centuries of reports varying in credibility. But despite justified skepticism, there are many who swear that this being is real. This boss was created for this video by the incredibly talented Steve Locks, and he absolutely went above and beyond this time. I rarely ask this, but please do go over to his Planet Minecraft page that's linked in the description, and leave him a comment. Okay, it is day 42. I don't think staying in the base is going to help at all, because he just can come right in and, destroy the walls. So I'm going to take Flumbo and we're going to just leave. We're going to head further west via the Tibetan Plateau. I quickly scooped up Flumbo before seeing the Yeti's boss bar again. So we immediately made our way towards the Tibetan Plateau. And after an afternoon of walking in blizzard-like conditions, we had found it. So we began our journey west. And the next morning, the storm had disappeared. That meant that my base was probably safe to return to now. But I still want to head further west as I was ready to properly hunt this creature and find where its lair is. I continued through the plateau while looking around for a river to follow, but with no river present, I had no choice but to try and speedrun the plateau, opting to now climb over mountains rather than around them, which led me to reaching Everest on the evening of day 44. From here, Flumbo and I continued west, into new territories. On the morning of day 45, we had made it fully around Everest, and were now headed into a mountainous forest. This is where I decided that we should head south and into the Himalayas, and as we did, I was reminded of how much I had missed the Himalayan scenery. I ended up passing a wandering trader, but since I had no emeralds, I just kept trekking. And the next morning, we made our way up and over this mountain, and then down into this valley. But after a little while of river travel, I realized that this wasn't just any valley, but rather the heart of the Himalayas. Langtang Valley, one of the most stunning treks you can make in Nepal, and a haven for some of Nepal's natural wildlife, like the Himalayan tahr, snow leopards, and even a certain familiar face. However, within this valley are the remnants of a tragedy. As in 2015, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake shook Nepal, and the Langtang village that sat in this valley was destroyed by the avalanche that followed. Now, it's not my place to discuss the tragedy any further, but I will say that the continued hospitality within the region is why the Nepalese people are not just regarded as brave, but also unwaveringly resilient. I rode along the river before it eventually reached a natural dead end. So I turned my boat around and started down the other way, and witnessed an amazing sunset. Next morning I went to get in my boat, but it seemed Flumbo had another idea. It looks like you're rowing the boat. After rowing along the river some more, I eventually wanted to head further west so I could find Chitwan and the Yeti's elusive lair. However, we instead came across a structure. I really liked the interior of this building, and it had some nice food, as well as a really good chest plate. I also took some rice to cook for later, before following this path that was behind the house. So, Flumbo and I continued on through the woods, until we saw some buildings. See, we had found a little plaza of sorts, and I absolutely loved it. The first building was a restaurant, and it had a lot of good food. Oh, and also a chef outfit that I will absolutely be wearing later. Flumbo and I then headed for the blue building, and found that there was a zombie infestation of sorts within. So, after taking care of it, I started to collect these book stacks, before realizing that one of these books was a journal. I mean, it was glowing and everything. I don't know how I didn't immediately notice it. Narration voice. I took the train from Bagyamani station. I definitely butchered the pronunciation of that. In far eastern Nepal, southwest of the Tiger's Nest. I followed this line for a while until I reached the station below Chitwan. I then headed north to Annapurna. After a few days of travel, I made it to the base camp. Only the camp was demolished. Giant gashes ran through the tents and pieces of debris were scattered all around. That's when I spotted a lone figure in the distance, watching me. The bipedal form then turned around and simply walked away. Okay, so notable things here. Southwest of Tiger's Nest. Now we have a starting point, right? This is the station. We have to take a train. Okay, southwest of Tiger's Nest. That's what I need to remember. Now I had even more information on where to find the Yeti, but it did mean that I'd have to double back and find the train station near the Tiger's Nest. Either way, it soon began to rain, so Flumbo and I found a room within this hotel. It's a fun room. It's your favorite. Oh, you want that room? You want that room. Alright, fine. We can have this room. When we woke up on day 48, I knew we'd have to get moving. So once again, I'd be using the Tibetan Plateau as a means of fast travel, even though it was anything but fast. Regardless, we made our way up the mountains again, and that evening, into the plateau. Only this time, there was water. This was huge, as if it went east, it would really reduce the amount of time it took for me to get home. So on day 49, we kept along this river, even as it opened into a lake, and eventually a dead end. But upon heading a bit further into the plateau, it turns out that there was another river, and this one was actually heading east. So we immediately hopped in and did some rowing. And when this one came to a dead end, that night we found yet another one. Next morning I woke up and realized that it was day 50, and normally I like to take this day to say thanks for watching this far into the video. Also, the comment that guessed the location first was Elias Greismeyer. So, congratulations, Elias. You get, Yeti. Yeah, you get the Yeti. He'll be arriving at your doorstep within the next few days, so just be prepared. Anyways, for the rest of the day, I went along this incredibly long river that was full of rocks and sediment to navigate around. On day 51, I reached another lake, only it was much more than just one lake. There were at least, a couple here. And this meant that I was at a landmark that I actually knew. See, just north of here is a very important place to Tibet, and because I probably won't have the chance to visit it later, I knew I had to take one more little side trip before finding the train station. So that's just what I did. I headed north up this river, and then disembarked, before collecting some blocks for my probably destroyed base. but I don't want to think about that right now. Anyways, Flumbo and I ended up in a rather rocky area by sunset. And unfortunately, our plateau travels continued well throughout the next day. We went north just about the whole time, while I ate my berries. Soon enough, I swam across this river, but then thought that maybe I was a bit too far north. So I headed south a little, and well, yeah, I really had gone too far north. Lhasa, arguably the most important place to Tibet. Lhasa is the capital of Tibet, and has been around since the 5th century, and even though the city sits at an altitude of almost 12,000 feet, or 3,600 meters, there is still something that towers above it: Potala Palace. This palace is not only a World Heritage Site, but also one of the most culturally significant places to Tibetan Buddhism, as it was the winter palace of the Dalai Lamas, and holds thousands of cultural relics within. I walked around Lhasa and found some pretty great loot. I ended up taking some red concrete powder though, before exploring a bit more. However, that's when I came across this thing. Yeah, a vehicle. Flumbo, you might not want to drive that. Yeah, that's... Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Can you follow me? This thing was fast, and Flumbo just followed behind me. Yeah, Lhasa was turning out to be one of my favorite places so far. But the next morning I knew I had to return home, so I took off in style, as my trip home just became a lot easier. Until it wasn't. Yeah, there was a river in front of me, so I knew what I had to do. I started to build a bridge, as I had a good guess that if my vehicle fell in the water, it would definitely not be usable again. So I sat Flumbo on the other end of the river, and continued building. This took me most of the day, but when I finally finished the bridge, well, it was a bit narrow to say the least. But either way, I started across it, and immediately almost fell in. Yeah, I had to constantly readjust this thing. After a while of tedious adjustments, I eventually had it pointing straight forward, so I started to ramp up my speed, until I hit this turtle. Yeah, this thing almost sent it straight into the water, and to make matters worse, mobs had started to spawn all around me, so I had to make one final push. I got across the bridge and quickly went to sleep. Next morning I dealt with the leftover mobs before continuing across the plateau at an unparalleled speed. And then this happened. Yeah, I made sure to land it safely, even though that was mostly out of my hands. But then I just kept along, now having to drive around the lakes. But soon enough that evening, I spotted a familiar pillager structure. So I stopped my vehicle, and then quickly broke the spawner before stealing the dark oak wood and relic within. This relic made it so that if I take damage, I get a small burst of speed. Yeah, pretty useful, I'd say. Anyways, on day 56, I was ready to properly get home. I continued to surf the mountains, and headed back west as I suspected that I was a bit too far east. But I still didn't make it home. No, I wouldn't make it home until the morning of day 57, when I spotted what I believed to be Flumbo Forest. So I parked my vehicle and made a little pillar to mark it. I then took Flumbo and walked through the woods, finally reaching the base that evening. And this is when I saw just how much damage had been done to it. So yeah, needless to say, I had some work to do. Next morning, I got to work on repairing my Tibet building. I knew the storm would be here in 2 days, but I more or less had a plan for that. So, after fully repairing the building, I then made a ladder to the next floor in the other building, before finishing the second floor roof. On day 59, I started converting the Tibet building into a kitchen, where I placed all of my kitchen equipment, and redid the windows and made a proper roof. Before making this kitchen topper, I was really happy with my progress by the end of the day, and of course, I had braced myself for what was to come. The storm was back, but this time I took Flumbo and brought him straight into this boat. I wasn't going to have the Yeti destroy any more of my base, so we kept on down the river, as I headed in the direction of the Tiger's Nest, which was east. After reaching a dead end, I made sure that Flumbo got to shore okay, before heading into the forest. Next morning, the storm still raged on, but that didn't stop us, as we headed further into the mountains, towards the Tiger's Nest Monastery. But then, I heard stomps. Yeah, we picked up the pace, until the stomps disappeared, only that definitely wasn't the last that I saw of it. I kept my distance, but out of curiosity, I pulled out my spyglass to take a closer look, until it turned in my direction. Yeah, Flumbo and I ran fast up this mountain, and we didn't stop. Next morning, the storm had disappeared, and this left us with our initial objective, to find the Tiger's Nest and then go southwest to the train station. After passing this river, I spotted a familiar frame. So from here I went directly south, right as it started to rain. As if I hadn't had enough bad weather at this point. Anyways, I did some rowing. And eventually some tree jumping, until I spotted a building. Only shortly after spotting it, I began to freeze. Yeah, see, my wool clothes had been torn up again from the bushes, but I was able to use these bamboo steps to jump over the wall. And after doing so, I was able to finally get to sleep. Next morning, I took a look around this monastery, and found some rather random but nonetheless good loot, like a golden apple and some iron. But I, of course, wanted wool, which I would find in the form of cobwebs. I also collected these banners for my makeshift prayer flags, before placing the cobwebs down and destroying them with a sword to get string. And naturally, Flumbo found himself stuck in the webs. After freeing him, I knew that we would have to get going, so I took one last look around before heading back west, in search of the station. Now, I'll spare you the next few days, as finding this thing was much harder than I thought it would be. It ended up being a lot further west. But regardless, these days were spent doing a lot of rowing and walking, and being frustrated. That is, until I spotted it on the evening of day 69. Yeah, that definitely looks very trainy to me. And while these trains are generated by the incredible MTR mod, I wanted to handle the travel cinematics here in my own style. The train finally arrived at the station below Chitwan, but before we continue, I wanted to cover a location that I passed in my train ride, and that is none other than Kathmandu's Durbar Square. See, the Kathmandu Durbar Square is a frozen piece of Nepal's history, as the plaza is surrounded by traditional Kathmandu architecture, and was where Nepal's royalty ruled when it was still a kingdom. And get this, Nepal's last king ruled until 2008, when it was officially established as a democratic republic. Either way, if you ever visit Nepal, be sure to put Durbar Square somewhere on your list. Now, back to Chitwan, where I found myself looking at a signpost. Chitwan is in that direction. Annapurna is in that direction. Wanting to explore Chitwan first, I took Flumbo, and we headed into the forestry that evening. The next morning, Flumbo and I fought this skeleton, but this time I came way too close to hitting him, so yeah, no more of that. Anyways, we traversed the forest by a treetop, as I noticed the trees were becoming a little bit more jungly. But that afternoon, we found this big open space with lots of grass. So I continued through it the next morning, before realizing that this was, in fact, Chitwan National Park. Chitwan was Nepal's first ever national park, being established in 1973, and while it used to be a popular hunting ground, hunting is now banned in the region, as this safari spot houses one of the last populations of the Indian rhinoceros, of which there are estimated to be only around 4,000 alive today. But Chitwan is also home to many other animals, like crocodiles, Bengal tigers, and much more. Needless to say, this park is an essential part of Nepal's environmental history. As we progressed into the trees, I was definitely worried about bringing Flumbo here, as there was some potentially dangerous wildlife. But I just kept an eye out, and we moved on. As we reached the swampy area that evening, we ended up spotting quite an elusive animal. On day 73, we continued north through the park, and rode through more of this water, before reaching another grassy patch. From here I spotted a river, and so we jumped in and rode along the river path, and it looked like we were back near the mountains. The next morning I continued my rowing, even as the river came to a dead end. So we turned around, and much later that same day, I found a new path in the river that headed north. Yeah, I can only hope that this led to Annapurna. But regardless, this is where the true diversity of Nepal comes in, as the scenery was pretty surreal. On day 75, I followed this river further, as it looked like the Himalayas were starting to form around us. See, my goal was now to reach Annapurna before the storm arrives. That way I could fight the Yeti during the storm. But yeah, I just did a lot of rowing this day. But the next morning I saw an animal that I promised I would cover. And so, without further ado, let's talk about the Himalayan tahr. The Himalayan tahr is a hoofed mammal that sits in the Himalayas, feeding on mostly just grass and leaves. Now, these guys are often described as being quite shy, believe it or not, and they spend a good bit of their day either eating or moving up and down the mountains. Yeah, I absolutely need to see one of these in real life. Anyways, tahrs aside, Flumbo and I eventually made our way into some much bigger mountains, and it was very possible that any one of these was Annapurna. So, as the river came to a dead end, I decided I was going to take a look around. But I have to craft some wool leggings first. Next morning I went down the river, and then climbed some to try and spot the mountain. Only problem is my mountain identification skills aren't quite refined, especially in Minecraft. But that soon didn't matter, as I spotted not a mountain, but a camp. So I went back down and got Flumbo, and we approached it. By the time we reached the camp it was dusk, but it was definitely a base camp. And it looked just like the tents we had found much earlier. I woke up the next morning and took a look around the camp, eventually collecting some of these books, before spotting another journal. The Nepal Police and National Park Services have been contacted due to reports of a large bipedal... Is it bipedal or bipedal? Bipedal bear walking around the site of Annapurna Base Camp. This bear is believed to be dangerous, but I have yet to see it for myself. Some accounts say it disappeared behind the mountain, somewhere on the west side of it. While I have no idea what it is, I can only hope that it isn't a threat. I have other things to worry about though, like summiting Annapurna. Wish me luck. Okay, so that tells us two things. That tells us that it is on the west side of Annapurna. And that also tells us that that must be Annapurna right there. So let's get a little bit closer to it and let's confirm that. As I approached the mountain in front of me, I spotted a pillager group. So I sat Flumbo down and quickly took care of them. And yes, this was Annapurna. Annapurna, reaching over 26,000 feet, or 8,000 meters. This mountain is often considered to be a harder summit than Everest, and it is considered to be the deadliest mountain in the world, right alongside K2. With a fatality rate of around 32% of those who summit it, Annapurna is infamous in the mountaineering community. I approached the mountain the next morning and went around the side of it, just as the journal had said. It was officially time to find the lair. Now, I didn't quite know how high it would be, so I climbed up the side of the mountain, but still no lair. And the thunder booming in the distance signaled that the storm was very ready to arrive. So, luckily for me, I did end up finding it that evening, before making a box for Flumbo. It was time. After 80 days of hunting this beast, I had found its lair. I entered the eerie cave, and it wasn't long until my expectations were met. As he approached, I left the cave, into the raging blizzard outside. And tried dropping this dripstone on him, but to no avail. So instead, I went in for the direct strikes. However, after healing up, I had lost him. Until I hadn't. I approached him yet again, but this time, it was an almost fatal mistake. Yeah, I ran carefully down the mountain and got away fast, before heading to sleep. Next morning I woke up and then healed up, as I was not going to surrender. And besides, the Yeti was almost at half health, so I took some more shots at it. But its crawl attack was simply brutal. Eventually I had to craft even more wool clothes, before it threw another snow boulder at me. But soon enough, I got my window. It was a short window, but I did a lot of damage. Enough to want to go in for the final blow. But he hit me off the mountain. So I quickly recovered, and with one last effort, dealt my final hits. I did it! I did it! I had defeated the Yeti. Okay, what did he drop? Carpet? That's good, that's good. And a lot of mutton. Okay, okay. Yeah, this was up there in my hardcore accomplishments. Next morning it was still storming, but now I had a new objective. And that was to get to my base in time for base review on day 99. And if you're new to the channel, that's a segment at the very end of my videos where I make my base look as good as possible and then give it an honest rating. So I headed back to the Annapurna base camp, which we reached that evening. On day 83, it was yet again still storming, but that didn't matter too much, as I didn't have a Yeti to worry about. And I was only going to be doing some river travel today anyways. So I headed in the direction of Chitwan. But getting home took several days, as I had to reach Chitwan again, go by train, and then find home from the station. But while I travel, I'll go ahead and rate the difficulty of the Himalayas. The Himalayas were just as I expected, cold, huge, and harsh. And while I didn't even run into many dangerous animals, it was the Yeti that upped the difficulty. I do want to note that I actually ran into a cobra on the way home, but that aside, thanks to the extreme colds, storms, and the Yeti, the Himalayas get a very respectable 8 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. With that being said though, I finally reached my base on the evening of day 91. Next morning I got myself ready for a rather extreme base makeover. Today I focused mostly on the main building as I redid the roof and built up the next floor. And I'll be honest, I don't think this base will fare well in the base review. I mean, I barely had time to build it. Anyways, the next morning I got a lot of sandstone and did the main frame of the top floor, as well as some of the roof, before starting on the very top roof on day 94. I also cooked my Yeti food and did some garden terraforming. Day 95 was used up by even more roof work and a mind-numbing amount of gray terracotta collecting. Yeah, I do not like the color gray anymore. Next day I then finally finished the roof and fought this axe guy, before making signs to use as trimming, and trapdoors for blinds. Now, day 97 was room decoration day, and then it was bridge fixing day, and then bridge adding beam day. That doesn't even really make sense, but then garden day, yeah, you get the point. I was in a mad rush to get this all done, but yeah, the quality of my base at this point was kind of unsalvageable. And that brings me to day 98, the final day of base building before base review. My itinerary for this day consisted of some berry planting, banner placing, and chef outfit wearing. And yeah, I do actually quite like this outfit. I woke up on day 99 and took a look around my base, before giving it a proper rating. Now, starting with the kitchen, I actually think this was the best part of the base. It's big, it has nice utilities, and it just looks good. So yeah, starting off strong. But now let's look at the garden, which has berry bushes, I guess. Yeah, I added a nice little water stream, but outside of that, it's pretty sad. But the interior of the main building isn't terrible. The main floor is quite nice actually, and my room is, well, fine. Now, finally the exterior, which overall represents a bit of a failed goal. The bridge is the Tibet building is even more and the main building is fully missing the Bhutanese decor, which makes it even more And I think describes the base as a whole, because this base gets a new low score of 5 out of 10. Yeah, I hope I never sink to this low again. But to be fair, I barely had any time to build this. Anyways, with that being said, there is still one more day left. I woke up on day 100 and walked the bridge with Flumbo, and since I tamed him, I don't actually have to say goodbye to him. He will just live here in my amazing base. But as I walked the bridge, I couldn't help but think about just how great the last 100 days had been. See, the Himalayas are a place you can travel to, but never a place you can replicate. Even in Minecraft, each region of these unimaginable peaks contain their own character and their own people, but it is all shaped around the ancient mountains themselves, as there really is nowhere like the Himalayas. And with that being said, it is about that time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.